War is often fought with bullets and bombs. But during the Second World War, another kind of weapon was being forged. One that would not just change the course of the conflict, it would change the fate of the entire world. This is the story of the race for the atomic bomb, a silent battle between the greatest minds of science and the darkest ambitions of war. A race between the United States and Nazi Germany, a race against time itself. In the early 1930s, a new kind of discovery shook the foundations of physics. The atom, once thought indivisible, was revealed to hold within it unimaginable energy. When German scientists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann split the uranium atom in 1938, the scientific world trembled. The experiment was simple. They bombarded uranium with neutrons and found that it split into smaller elements, releasing an enormous amount of energy. It was nuclear fission, and it proved one terrifying truth. If you could control this reaction, you could create an explosion unlike anything humanity had ever seen. But just as this revelation dawned, Europe was falling into darkness. Adolf Hitler had already set his sights on conquest. And among the many tools he sought to build his empire, the power of the atom became one of the most coveted. The German atomic program begins. In April 1939, just months before the invasion of Poland, German physicists began discussing the possibility of an Uran project, the uranium project. Its goal was simple but ambitious: to investigate whether nuclear fission could be harnessed into a weapon. At its center stood Werner Heisenberg, one of the brightest minds of the century, a Nobel laureate and the creator of quantum mechanics. Heisenberg had the intellect, the prestige, and the access to the Reich's resources. But his challenge was immense. Germany lacked the infrastructure for a full-scale nuclear program. They had no large supply of uranium, no plutonium production, and only limited access to heavy water, the moderator needed to slow down neutrons in a reactor. In Norway, the Nazis occupied the Vemork plant, which produced heavy water, an essential ingredient in their experiments. It became a critical target for Allied saboteurs, who would later risk their lives to destroy it. At the same time, Germany's best scientists were scattered. Some had fled persecution, many of them Jewish. Albert Einstein, Leo Szilard, and others had already escaped to the United States, taking with them not only knowledge, but warning. The Einstein Letter. In the summer of 1939, physicist Leo Szilard realized the danger. He, along with Einstein, drafted a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. It warned that Nazi Germany might be developing a powerful new bomb, one based on uranium fission. Einstein, a pacifist by nature, hesitated, but signed it. The Einstein-Szilard letter arrived at the White House on October 11, 1939. It was short, direct, and chilling. A single bomb of this type, carried by boat and exploded in a port, might very well destroy the whole port together with some of the surrounding territory. Roosevelt read it, and his response would change history. He created the Advisory Committee on Uranium, the first small step toward what would become the Manhattan Project. Cut to Roosevelt at desk, slow zoom on the words Uranium Committee. At that moment, the race began. The Allies versus the Axis, not only on the battlefields of Europe, but in the laboratories of science. The science of destruction. The challenge of creating an atomic bomb was not merely theoretical. It was a problem of physics, chemistry, and engineering combined. You needed to separate uranium-235, the rare isotope capable of sustaining a chain reaction, from uranium-238, which made up over 99% of natural uranium. That meant vast enrichment plants, complex centrifuges, and enormous power consumption. For the Germans, this was nearly impossible. Their war machine was focused on tanks, aircraft, and rockets. And as the conflict dragged on, Hitler grew impatient with projects that didn't promise immediate results. Heisenberg's team built a small experimental reactor, Uranmaschine B8, in a cave in southern Germany. But it never reached critical mass. The project faltered, underfunded, and isolated. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the Americans were building an empire of science. The birth of the Manhattan Project. By late 1941, the U.S. was still neutral in the war, but not blind. Reports from Europe hinted that the Germans might be ahead in nuclear research. And after the attack on Pearl Harbor, everything changed. The United States entered the war and mobilized not only its armies, but its scientists. General Leslie Groves, the man who built the Pentagon, was appointed to lead a new, top-secret operation. His mission: harness the power of the atom before Hitler could. He recruited theoretical physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer, whose brilliance and intensity made him the ideal scientific director. Together, they built the Manhattan Project, a network of secret facilities stretching from Los Alamos to Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Cut to aerial view of Los Alamos, classified signs, scientists entering guarded labs. Entire towns were created out of nothing. Workers lived behind barbed wire, unaware of what they were building. They called it the gadget. But behind those fences, the world's first atomic bomb was taking shape. While soldiers clashed across continents, in these hidden cities, a new kind of war was being fought. One where victory would not be decided by armies, but by the secrets of the atom. By 1942, the atomic race had become a matter of survival. What had started as a theoretical discussion between physicists was now a secret front of the Second World War. The laboratories of Los Alamos buzzed with secrecy. Men and women worked in total isolation, surrounded by fences, guards, and silence. They didn't know what they were making. They only knew it was important. At Oak Ridge, Tennessee, entire mountains of rock were moved to build uranium enrichment plants. Machines taller than buildings, calutrons and diffusion chambers devoured electricity from nearby dams. Their purpose: to separate the rare isotope uranium-235. At the same time, in Hanford, Washington, engineers built vast reactors to create plutonium, a new element discovered only a few years earlier. It would become the heart of the second bomb. The scale was staggering. By 1943, the Manhattan Project employed over 130,000 people, consumed more electricity than all of New York City, and cost more than $2 billion in 1940s money. And yet, only a handful of people truly knew what they were building. Oppenheimer's burden. At the center stood J. at a 1.0, thin, intense, chain-smoking, a man torn between science and conscience. He gathered the greatest minds in physics: Enrico Fermi, Niels Bohr, Richard Feynman, and many others, refugees and prodigies from across the world. They called him Oppie, and under his leadership, Los Alamos became a fortress of intellect. The scientists faced questions no one had ever asked before. Could a chain reaction run out of control? Could a bomb ignite the atmosphere itself? At night, they debated ethics over cigarettes and coffee. They were building a weapon to end a war,
but possibly to end much more than that. Across the Atlantic, the Nazi effort fails. Meanwhile, Germany's nuclear effort was crumbling. The heavy water plant in Vemork, Norway, had become the lifeline of the Nazi program. If the Allies could cut it off, they could cripple any chance of a German bomb. In February 1943, a team of Norwegian commandos, trained by the British Special Operations Executive, infiltrated the plant. They skied across frozen mountains, crept through the night, and planted explosives deep within the facility.
The mission succeeded. Operation Gunnerside, one of the most daring acts of sabotage in the war. The plant was destroyed, the heavy water supply lost. From that point onward, Germany's nuclear ambitions were all but doomed. While Heisenberg continued small-scale experiments in Germany's caves and cellars, the Americans were racing ahead with unlimited resources. The balance of scientific power had shifted decisively westward. Operation Alsos, the hunt for the German scientists. In 1944, as Allied armies pushed deeper into Europe, a special intelligence mission was launched, Operation Alsos. Its goal, to capture German nuclear scientists, seize research materials, and discover how close Hitler had come to building the bomb. Led by Colonel Boris Pash and supported by military scientists, Alsos teams followed the front lines, raiding laboratories and interrogating physicists. In Strasbourg, they found evidence that the German project was far behind: crude reactors, notes, and small amounts of uranium. Later, they captured Heisenberg himself, along with his colleagues, and shipped them to England under top-secret detention at Farm Hall. There, British intelligence secretly recorded their conversations. When news of Hiroshima reached them in August 1945, the German scientists were stunned. Heisenberg refused to believe it at first, then, realizing it was true, fell silent. Meanwhile, in the desert. Back in America, the scientists were entering the final stage of the Manhattan Project. After years of calculations and sleepless nights, they had designed two types of bomb. Little Boy, a uranium gun-type bomb. Fat Man, a plutonium implosion bomb. To test their theories, they built a third device, codenamed the Gadget. It was to be detonated in the desert near Alamogordo, New Mexico. The code name for the test, Trinity. The Trinity Test, the birth of the atomic age. July 16, 1945. At 5:29 a.m., the desert was silent, except for the countdown. 10, 9, 8. Scientists huddled in bunkers 10 miles away, wearing dark goggles. Oppenheimer stood among them, eyes fixed on the horizon. When the bomb detonated, night turned into day. A blinding sphere of light rose over the desert, expanding into a mushroom cloud that reached the heavens. The shock wave shattered windows miles away. One observer wrote, "It was as if the earth had opened and the sun had set inside." Oppenheimer would later recall a line from the Bhagavad Gita.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
In that moment, the atomic age was born. By mid-1945, Nazi Germany was finished. Hitler was dead. Berlin had fallen. But the war in the Pacific still raged on. Japan refused to surrender. Its army fought to the last man on islands like Iwo Jima and Okinawa, battles that left hundreds of thousands dead. For the United States, the prospect of invading the Japanese mainland promised a nightmare. The Joint Chiefs estimated that an invasion could cost over 1 million American lives. And so, as the fighting dragged on, a question reached the highest levels of power. Should the weapon built in the desert be used to end the war? Truman's dilemma.
When Franklin Roosevelt died suddenly in April 1945, Vice President Harry S. Truman inherited not only the presidency, but the greatest secret in history. Within weeks, he was briefed on the Manhattan Project. Truman was a pragmatic man, not a scientist, but a wartime leader faced with impossible choices. He asked his advisors one question: will it save American lives? The answer was yes. At least, that was what the generals believed. At the Potsdam Conference in July, Truman hinted to Stalin that the United States possessed a new and powerful weapon. Stalin, already informed through Soviet espionage, simply nodded. The decision was made. If Japan refused to surrender, the bomb would be used. Target: Hiroshima. A committee of military planners selected the target. They sought a city of strategic importance, untouched by previous bombings, to measure the bomb's full effect. They chose Hiroshima, an industrial city of 300,000 people, home to Japan's Second Army headquarters. The date: August 6, 1945. The weapon: Little Boy, a uranium bomb, the only one of its kind. The aircraft was named Enola Gay after the pilot's mother, Colonel Paul Tibbets. The bomb itself was nearly 3 meters long and weighed over 4 tons. It had never been tested, but the scientists were confident it would work. The mission. At 2:45 a.m., the Enola Gay lifted off from Tinian Island in the Marianas. It was escorted by 2 observation planes, the Great Artiste and Necessary Evil. The crew checked instruments, adjusted settings, and prepared for the most consequential mission in human history. At 8:15 a.m., the bomb bay doors opened. Little Boy fell silently for 43 seconds. Then, a blinding flash. The explosion. At 600 meters above Hiroshima, the bomb detonated with the force of 15 kilotons of TNT. The temperature at the center reached over 1,000,000 degrees Celsius. In less than 1 second, 80,000 people were gone. Buildings vaporized. Shadows of people were seared into walls. The city center vanished beneath a cloud that rose 10 miles into the sky. Those who survived the initial blast faced fires, radiation burns, and poisoned rain. Doctors and nurses were killed instantly, leaving the wounded without aid. Hiroshima had ceased to exist. It was the first time in history that humanity had used the power of the atom, not for discovery, but for destruction. Reactions. In Washington, the announcement stunned the world. President Truman addressed the nation. "We have used it in order to shorten the agony of war, in order to save the lives of thousands and thousands of young Americans." In Los Alamos, some scientists cheered, others wept.
Oppenheimer reportedly told his colleagues, "The physicists have known sin." To the military, the bomb was a success. To many scientists, it was a moment of unbearable weight. Nagasaki. 3 days later, Japan still refused to surrender. Another bomb, Fat Man, the plutonium implosion device, was ready. The target was Kokura. But heavy clouds forced the crew to divert to their secondary target, Nagasaki. At 11:02 a.m., Fat Man exploded with even greater power, 21 kilotons. The hilly terrain spared part of the city, but another 40,000 people died instantly. Within days, Emperor Hirohito addressed his people. "We must endure the unendurable and suffer what is insufferable." Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945. The Second World War was over. The world after the bomb.
While the streets of America erupted in joy, a quiet unease spread among the scientists who had built the bomb. They knew what would follow, a world forever living under the shadow of their creation. The war was over, but peace, real peace, was nowhere to be found. The atomic bomb had ended World War II and instantly begun something else, a new age. A world divided not by trenches or tanks, but by fear. The balance of power had shifted overnight. The United States stood alone as the only nation possessing the most terrible weapon ever built. But not for long. Farm Hall, the German scientists react. In that quiet British estate, 10 of Germany's top nuclear scientists were being held under house arrest, unaware that their conversations were being recorded. Among them, Werner Heisenberg, Otto Hahn, and Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker. When news of Hiroshima reached them through a BBC radio broadcast, their initial disbelief was recorded word for word. "They're bluffing," one said. "No," replied another. "It's possible." Then silence. Heisenberg, who had once led Germany's nuclear project, began to sketch calculations on a chalkboard, trying to understand how the Americans had achieved it. He realized, too late, that his own design would never have worked. The transcripts revealed something else, not because of lack of intellect, but because of lack of unity, resources, and vision. The Allies had mobilized an entire nation's industry for one purpose. Hitler had never truly believed in the power of science. The Soviet shadow. While the world celebrated peace, another race was already beginning. The Soviet Union had spies deep inside the Manhattan Project. Men like Klaus Fuchs, a German-born physicist working in Los Alamos, secretly passed critical designs and calculations to Soviet intelligence. His reports gave the USSR a shortcut that would change the course of history. Within 4 years, Soviet scientists, led by Igor Kurchatov, would build their own bomb. The monopoly of power the U.S. held in 1945 would vanish by 1949. When the Soviet bomb exploded in the Kazakh steppe, the shock echoed across the globe. The nuclear race had begun again, only this time it was no longer theoretical. The scientists' regret. In the United States, many of the scientists who had worked under Oppenheimer now questioned what they had done. Leo Szilard, who had first warned Roosevelt of the atomic danger, became one of its strongest opponents. He drafted petitions against the future use of nuclear weapons, arguing that mankind had crossed a line it might never return from. Oppenheimer himself was haunted. At Los Alamos, he had been a leader. After Hiroshima, he became a philosopher of guilt. He spoke of the bomb as a symbol, both of triumph and tragedy. He met President Truman in 1946 and told him, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." Truman, disturbed, later called him that crybaby scientist. Years later, Oppenheimer's security clearance was revoked during the Red Scare. The man who helped create the bomb was now branded a liability. Nuclear politics and the new fear. As the 1950s dawned, the nuclear secret was gone. Both superpowers raced to build arsenals. More bombs, bigger bombs, hydrogen bombs. Ordinary citizens were taught to duck and cover. Cities held air raid drills. Children practiced hiding under desks. The world that had survived the Second World War now lived under the shadow of total annihilation. From Hiroshima's ashes rose not just peace, but paranoia. Every test was a show of strength, every detonation a message. The nuclear arms race had become a contest of ideology, pride, and survival. The legacy of the race. It began as a race between nations, between scientists and soldiers, between fear and hope. But it became something more, a mirror held up to humanity itself. Einstein later said, "The release of atomic power has changed everything except our way of thinking." In that one sentence lay the truth of the atomic age. Science had revealed the secrets of the universe, but not the wisdom to control them. The world reforged. In Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the ruins were rebuilt into symbols of peace. Each year, survivors gather to float paper lanterns on the river, their lights drifting into the night, a reminder of what was lost and what was learned. The atomic bomb ended the deadliest war in history, but it also began an era where destruction could be global, instantaneous, and final. The race for the bomb was not just a story of science. It was the story of human ambition, brilliant, relentless, and blind. Time has softened the noise of war, but beneath the silence of peace lies the echo of the atom, a reminder of what human hands can create and destroy. The race for the atomic bomb ended in 1945, yet its consequences have never truly ended. The New World Order. After the war, the victors sought to ensure that nuclear devastation would never happen again. The United Nations was formed, a fragile hope that dialogue might replace destruction. But even as diplomats spoke of peace, generals and scientists prepared for the next conflict. In 1946, just 1 year after Hiroshima, the United States tested atomic bombs in the Pacific. The world watched as warships vanished in pillars of steam. Nuclear explosions had become theater, a demonstration of power. By the 1950s, both the United States and the Soviet Union possessed thousands of nuclear weapons. For the first time, humanity had the ability to destroy itself completely. Deterrence and fear. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction, MAD, became the logic of peace. If both sides could obliterate each other, neither would dare strike first. It was a paradox, peace through the promise of annihilation. Nuclear war plans, early warning systems, and the endless vigilance of the Cold War became part of daily life. At any moment, a mistake, a false alarm, or a misunderstanding could end civilization. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the world came closer than ever before. For 13 days, the fate of humanity hung on a few men's decisions. The lessons of the atomic race were being tested again, this time in real time. Science and responsibility. As decades passed, the scientists of the Manhattan Project grew older and more vocal. They had built the bomb in fear that Hitler would build it first. When that fear proved unfounded, many wondered if they had gone too far. They learned that knowledge cannot be contained once discovered. Every breakthrough becomes a double-edged sword, capable of saving lives or ending them. From the same atomic principles came nuclear energy, radiation therapy, and space exploration. The atom, once a symbol of terror, also became a tool of progress. The power itself was not evil, only how it was used. Echoes of the race. Even today, the legacy of that wartime race continues to shape global politics. Nations guard their arsenals as deterrents, while others seek them for power or security. Treaties are signed, broken, renewed, and debated, each one an echo of 1945. The bomb remains both relic and prophecy, a weapon built to end wars that now ensures they never truly end. Where once scientists raced against time in secrecy, now tourists walk through museums and memorials. The laboratories of Los Alamos and Oak Ridge stand as monuments to human ingenuity and human fear. Hiroshima's message. Every August, the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki gather to remember. They do not speak of vengeance, they speak of peace. Children light paper lanterns, each one carrying a wish, that the light of knowledge never again becomes the fire of war. The survivors, the hibakusha, tell their stories so that no generation forgets what the atom can do. Their voices are a warning written in history's scars. The endless question. The race for the atomic bomb was more than a contest between nations. It was a test of the human spirit, of curiosity, fear, ambition, and morality. Einstein's equation had unlocked the universe's most secret energy.
Oppenheimer's hands had built its first weapon, and both men would spend the rest of their lives wondering whether they had done the right thing. Science will always push forward. That is its nature, to question, to discover, to build. But wisdom must walk beside it. Without it, knowledge becomes a curse rather than a gift. Epilogue: The Light and the Shadow. From Berlin to Los Alamos, from Weymouth's frozen valleys to the deserts of New Mexico, the race for the atomic bomb defined the 20th century. It ended one war but began another. It united the brightest minds but divided the world. The bomb was not the end of history. It was the beginning of a new kind of history, one written not in battles or borders, but in the fragile balance between power and restraint. In every age, humanity reaches for knowledge. Sometimes it finds light. Sometimes it finds fire. The story of the atomic race reminds us that both are born from the same spark, and that the choice between them will always be ours.